Stephen Sharif just posted a major update about the Ashes of Creation lawsuit. I've now read the judge's official order and the transcript from the August 11th hearing, and there's one part of this ruling that I think is getting way less attention than it deserves, more than the social media accounts everyone's talking about. Another foreclosure of Intrepid Studios is still possible, but if it happens, it's not going to look anything like the first one. A federal judge has now ordered neutral oversight of any future foreclosure. Maybe even more important, someone independent is going to go through the massive stack of loan documents behind the case and figure out how much secured debt Intrepid actually owes. The defendants are claiming roughly $84 million. Depending on what that independent review finds, the answer could have a real impact on who's actually able to acquire Ashes of Creation if it goes to foreclosure again. So instead of asking who won this hearing, Sharif or Dawson, I want to walk through what Judge Linda Lopez actually decided, why she decided it, and what it means going forward. Because this hearing changed the situation in some pretty significant ways. One thing that stood out to me reading the transcript from August 11th was Judge Lopez's tone. She expressed concern about how much litigation is piling up in this case, and reminded both attorneys they need to give the court the full picture, not just the half of the argument that helps their client. With that out of the way, the court got into what I think is the biggest issue to come out of this hearing, the possibility of another foreclosure. Judge Lopez ordered that a qualified neutral person be appointed to oversee and monitor any future foreclosure sale of Intrepid's assets. That person will also report back to the court on whether the sale was actually conducted properly. Here's why that matters. The judge went back to problems the court had already identified with the first foreclosure, violations of the California Commercial Code, including issues with how the private sale was handled, notice to a senior secured lender, and whether the whole thing was commercially reasonable. So this isn't the judge saying it'd probably be smart to have someone neutral around. The problems with the first foreclosure are a direct reason she wants oversight of the next one. Now, the part of this ruling I think matters most, the money. Dawson and TFE have asserted roughly $84 million in secured debt against Intrepid. The hearing transcript gets into dozens of promissory notes behind that number. But Stephen disputes how much of that is actually secured against Intrepid's assets. And that distinction matters enormously, because there's a big difference between a company owing someone money and that debt being legally secured by the company's property. Judge Lopez had ordered an independent person to go through the loan documents, amendments, agreements, and filings, and determine the actual amount of secured debt Intrepid owes. Why should gamers care about that number? Because it could directly shape a future foreclosure. Say a lender has $20 million of debt that's legitimately secured against a company's assets. If those assets go to a foreclosure sale, that lender can use the $21 million as a bid instead of bringing $21 million in cash. That's called a credit bid. Bring that back to Ashes. If TFE really does have roughly $84 million in secured debt, that puts them in an extremely strong position at a future sale. But if the independent review finds that only a portion of those loans are actually secured, the amount available for a credit bid could end up being a lot smaller. And that changes who's realistically able to acquire the assets. That's why I think this is the biggest development out of the whole hearing. The judge isn't just assigning a referee to the next foreclosure. She's also ordering an independent look at the number that could determine how much leverage TFE actually has when that foreclosure happens. The parties have until August 25th to propose someone qualified for this role. If they can't agree, Judge Lopez will pick. While all of that plays out, there's another major question: who controls the game itself? This is where the court set up a second neutral structure. Intrepid asked the court to force Stephen Sharif, John Moore, and others to turn over a huge amount of company property: source code, repositories, servers, credentials, cloud infrastructure, development systems, company records. Basically, most of what you'd need to actually operate and keep developing Ashes of Creation. Judge Lopez ordered Sharif and Moore to turn over Intrepid's IP, but not directly to Dawson or the current Intrepid board. It goes to the neutral IP custodian already involved in this case. Intrepid, in turn, gets full operational access to those assets for business purposes. So this isn't the code getting locked away where nobody can touch it. The court put a neutral party between the two sides. Custodian preserves and controls the assets. Intrepid can use them to run the company. And that gets us to the part of the ruling that's gotten the most attention online. 5 assets Stephen does not have to turn over right now: the Ashes of Creation website domain, Reddit, Discord, YouTube, and X. The judge said those assets, quote, remain in dispute. Those 3 words matter. She didn't rule that Stephen owns them. She didn't rule that Intrepid owns them either. It's unresolved. The transcript makes clear why. Intrepid ran into a problem with the legal basis it was using to try to get those assets turned over at the stage. Its existing claims center on things like trade secret misappropriation, but some of its arguments about those public-facing accounts looked more like trademark or ownership claims, a different legal theory than what's actually in front of the court right now. The judge wasn't convinced Intrepid had established the basis it needed to force turnover of those specific assets at this point in the case. So the takeaway isn't Stephen owns the Ashes social media. It's Intrepid hasn't shown enough under its current claims to get those accounts turned over yet. And even here, Stephen doesn't get free rein. If Intrepid needs access to one of those disputed assets to actually run the business, the court ordered Stephen to provide limited access. The next thing I'm watching is August 25th. That's when we should learn more about who will actually perform these neutral roles. And after that, the number I want to know is this: out of the roughly $84 million being claimed, how much does the independent reviewer determine is actually secured? Because that number could have a very real impact on what happens to Ashes of Creation next. In fact, I think our next video is going to look into Stephen's claims as to why that is not a secured credit. But until then, as always, I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you next time.